And good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking part in this meeting. I'm Ed Dombrowski, the Town Council Chairman from the town of Wakefield, and it's my distinct honor this evening to welcome our neighbors of Reading, Melrose, Stoneham, Linfield, and Saugus to take part in this first of what will hopefully be a series of regional summit meetings where we can all together as a region discuss a number of issues, share a number of best practices, and hopefully work out a number of different collaborations going forward in the months and years to come. Before I begin, I do know that we have the select board of Reading, the entire select board, and so I'll turn it over for the moment to the select board chair to call the meeting to order for their purposes.
Thanks, Ed. This is Mark Docksher, the chair of the Reading Select Board. I'd like to call the meeting of the Reading Select Board to order.
Thank you for that, Mark. And again, this evening, it's intended to be a free flow of ideas. I hope that we'll be able to share some of our best practices and be able to talk about opportunities that may lie ahead for us as a region, if we think about ourselves as 6 different communities coming together for a common purpose. And I do think we have a lot of opportunity here to go through and discuss a number of aspects of how we all govern, what we do, and how we can perhaps learn from each other and collaborate going forward. With that, we have a fairly packed agenda this evening, but I am also mindful of everyone's time, and I do want to make sure we move through this agenda quickly, but make sure we have a good dialogue going throughout. So with that in mind, I would just ask that everyone, when you're not speaking, if you could please mute to make sure that we don't have any distractions from background noise. And also, when you're looking to make a comment, if you could please raise your hands, and I'll be sure to call on each of you. And if you could also identify yourself and the community from which you serve, that would also be much appreciated. This evening we have town administrators, town managers, and members of select boards, the Melrose City Council, the Town Council in Wakefield, and boards of selectmen as well. So with that, I'll begin with the agenda with the second item following introductions, and that is managing expectations and promoting public safety. Certainly, this was an idea that I had hoped to have under different circumstances. I don't think any of us anticipated a year ago that we'd find ourselves in the current pandemic that we do, but nonetheless, we're all adapting and responding. So with that in mind, it seems like an appropriate time for all of us to come together to share some of our thoughts in terms of where we've been thus far, where we see ourselves going from a municipal governing perspective, and ways that we can get there most effectively and efficiently. So with that, the item managing expectations and promoting public safety is really looking at what we're doing currently and what we may be able to do differently going forward into the future, and how we can learn from each other and perhaps adopt best practices or perhaps be more coordinated in our approach. This evening is certainly not about deliberations. There are no votes being taken, but instead it's an opportunity for all of us to share ideas and thoughts. And the hope is that each of the delegations that we have represented here from the 6 communities will be able to go back to their respective communities and talk about what we've discussed here now, and then hopefully we can begin a dialogue that will be going on for the weeks, months, and ideally years to come. So one of the first things that comes up, I know for us as a town in Wakefield, and certainly every community, is how we deal with open spaces, use of open spaces currently, be it for recreational assets or perhaps for events, and what sorts of policies we could see going forward. We're certainly awaiting a lot of guidance from the governor at this point at the state level, but I'm sure that many of us are also interested in how we take the governor's guidance and implement it in our respective communities. So I'd open it up to everyone to ask what you're finding currently with the policies you have in place and what direction you see going forward and with those policies, again, based upon the governor's anticipated recommendations in the coming weeks. Anyone wish to take the lead on that? I see, actually, Phil Crawford. Yes. We
have to unmute myself first.
Yourself, yeah.
So, thanks, Ed. Yeah, of course, we all are governing by the guidance from the governor. But as far as Linfield goes, we are certainly abiding by the governor's wishes, and we've closed down everything in town. I think like every other town, you know, golf courses, parks, playgrounds, ball fields, everything's been closed. There's certainly a lot of requests to start opening things, even though the governor hasn't given us a timeline on that yet. We'd certainly like to see that. I think one of the things we'd like to see, you know, based on his guidance, if we have some chance to open something soon, we're probably going to be looking at maybe the golf courses would be open as soon as they allow. One of the other big programs in town is our Little League, which every town has a very strong Little League, I'm sure. They're looking to do something in the summer. They know that spring season is not going to happen, but there's a possibility of possibly doing an abbreviated summer season in August or whenever we can get back on those fields. So that's kind of what we're looking at for open space. There is some miscellaneous use here and there. I'm sure everybody's seen that across their towns. You know, some people occasionally go out and use a tennis court, or kids shoot down there shooting at the basketball court. But you know, and I've seen a few people taking some shots on the golf courses, but generally they've been pretty good abiding by the no use rules right now. And as you know, it's going to be more challenging as the weather gets better. So that's where we are. It's really following the governor's lead, and you know, we have multiple leagues and groups ready to go as soon as we can open up something, but we'll do it slowly and do it, you know, in the best for safety for the town. So that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I do know a lot of towns, there is a lot of crossover. Breakheart Reservation, for example, Wakefield and Saugus share that. I know that Lake Quantapowhat here in Wakefield draws a number of visitors. We should have a tax for the number of surrounding communities that come to our lake. In Pine Bakes Field and Melrose, I know there are some issues there for some of our Melrose City councilors who have joined as well. So, and to your point, it does seem like that's going to be an issue that's going to become more of an issue as the weather improves and as the longer people are staying at home and socially distanced. Do we have any other perspectives from any other communities on this piece?
Hi, this is Ann Landry from the town of Reading, Vice Chair of the Reading Select Board. I would add that in some ways the Board of Health in Reading has come out ahead almost of some of the governor's orders, not inconsistent with any of the governor's orders, but for example, we had a mask order in place a few days before the governor issued his order. And with respect to public spaces, there are some spaces where we have our own town-specific orders that I think are consistent with the governor's advisories with respect to social distancing, but not necessarily mandated by them, or weren't originally. You know, for example, all of our town athletic facilities are closed, which is consistent certainly with the spirit of the governor's orders. But our town forest is open, and conservation land is open. So there's depending on the type of open space, there are different rules to be followed.
And are you finding that's working well thus far?
I would say so. We certainly do hear complaints from residents that some people are not respecting social distancing and are defying the orders and using athletic facilities in defiance. Although I know our facilities department has done things like tie off, zip tie the basketball hoops, and there's signage letting people know that our athletic facilities are closed.
And I see that Mr. Mayo from Wakefield, the town administrator from Mayo, has his hand up as well. Mr.
Yes,
Mayo.
thank you, Ed. I just wanted to thank particularly the town of Stoneham, because that's the only town that I haven't had a citizen call and yell at me about the lake being cordoned off to no parking. So Stoneham gets a gold star among other communities. But I think that what Mr. Crawford was saying about the sports groups, we're hearing that in Wakefield too, both our youth sports and and the adult sports groups. We have a very active summer league, and they're itching to get back on the field. So we are waiting for guidance like everybody else. We also have putting together a brand new softball field for our seniors, or for our softball team in high school, and it really is hard that those seniors aren't going to get a game on that field this year. So we're going to figure hopefully something out at the end of the year that they can use it once. So yeah, we're having the same issues. The town forest is open. People are hiking. People should be hiking and walking. And I think now with the governor's order going into effect tomorrow morning, that's going to be very interesting on how that is enforced on all those walkers from out of town, except for Stoneham that seems to follow the rules. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayo. And that does also bring us to the issue of enforcement. And I know that some towns and cities have put in face covering policies before it became a statewide requirement. But when we're talking about things like restaurants and even essential retail businesses, a lot of the responsibility seems to fall on our respective local boards of health. And I'm curious to know what sort of responsibilities or what sort of reactions you've been receiving from your board of health relative to that, because it seems like a lot of responsibility is being shouldered by them, and I would anticipate for the months to come. And it's a lot for a board that isn't necessarily equipped or expected to have that level of incredible responsibility for such a duration of time. Has anyone had any experience relative to that? I see no hands up. I will say that Mr. Crawford, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Just to talk quickly about that, obviously the Board of Health is under a tremendous workload right now with the amount of positive cases. I don't know how our town of Linfield compares to the neighboring towns as far as numbers of cases, but our Board of Health is one person. We also have a emergency management team that's in place, probably like everyone else, and our fire chief is our town administrator are the heads of that, and they're doing a tremendous job also. The combination of the management team and the Board of Health together have brunted most of the burden on this. And I think as of this morning, the town of Linfield had 77 positive cases since this began. We've had 11 deaths. So it's a lot for a small town, obviously, and obviously one death's too many. But that burden that falls on not just the Board of Health, but our medical team is taking its toll. And we've had our public safety workers been in quarantine and come back out. So there's a lot going on with that, and I can't say enough about them and the tremendous job they've done. And I'm sure that would be echoed throughout each town, but it's been quite a ride so far, and I really can't say enough about the work they've done. So thanks.
And I'll turn it next to Chairman Doxer from Reading.
Thanks, Ed. Just to kind of reiterate some of the points Phil was making also, I think we all have our response systems in place. I think Reddings is doing a tremendous job through a command structure. The Board of Health is under a lot of pressure to get stuff done. I was going to mention something a little bit different. One of the things that we've been trying to do with our select board meetings and other things is to make sure that we're able to broadcast a consistent message to the town in all the different ways that we possibly can. So clearly articles coming out in the newspapers, things that are going online through Facebook, whatever, but making sure that at our select board meetings, we're taking time in the beginning to talk about what's happening. Once every few weeks, we'll go into a bit more depth, but each week just to kind of talk about what's happening, give the Board of Health an opportunity to share what's going on, allow for both board members and the public to ask questions if there are things that aren't clear. And since the thing has been kind of spiraling with new activities, each week or each 2 weeks, I think it's been a pretty good way to share the information. And again, just make sure that we're getting consistent message out at all times.
I guess of this entire group, what are the sorts of considerations, if you know them yet, that are going to guide your decision making in terms of policies, in terms of use of open space, or allowing for gatherings in the future? Obviously not something to be happening next week, but in the months to come. Has anyone given some thought to that in terms of what that looks like? I know, again, we'll be guided a lot by what the state advises or perhaps mandates relative to that, but has anyone at the community level given some thought to what that may look like, or what factors would be considered to get us to get your community to that point? So seeing no hands raised as of yet, it seems like perhaps that is something that I think I would anticipate all of us in the weeks. Actually, yes.
This is Bob Lerlasher from Reading.
Yes.
One of the things that Reading thought was really important is that the town and the schools do the same thing. So whatever the state may allow is one thing, but we want to make sure that in terms of summer programs, we're not doing different things. We have, I've met 3 times this week with the superintendent just on this issue in terms of summer camps, summer programs. Probably all of you are mandated to run certain special ed activities for the summer, and that's the only thing we know is going to continue. But we just want to make sure that both school and town are on the same page, if you will, in terms of the community, and sort of to reinforce Mark's consistent message theme.
Thank you for that. And certainly, and that is a big issue, because we're looking at, I know we heard mention of Little League, but there are a lot of summer camps, and depending on what the expectations are with people working from home, summer camps often provide a lot of childcare for families too. And so has there been much discussion with anyone in terms of those issues, your recreation departments, summer programming, camps and the like? Has that come up as an issue? Does anyone have a sense of what direction your community might be heading in relative to that? Is it too early? I'll turn to see Mr. Mayo from Wakefield.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. Well, it's not too early, because now would be, or a few weeks ago was when we would have been, registering for all these camps. So we're waiting for the guidance. We're thinking of it. We're considering things with the schools, because we have a lot of crossover traditionally with school events, school run programs and town run programs. So right now we're waiting for, like everybody else, waiting for that guidance. But I think we're all kind of thinking that there's not going to be a lot that's going to go on in these settings these summer. If something does, I think that's something that this group could probably work with to see who can run what program, who can run another program. I think a lot of it will be contract based, because we won't have the staff hired. They'll have to go to a company that's already doing this, that already does sports camps. So I think that's something that we can have a follow up on and consider. It's a good thing that we're together to talk about those things today. So. Excuse me.
It may be something where we end up as communities or regionally, decide that if there are activities that can happen safely, that perhaps one town picks up the basketball, clinic, another town picks up, the soccer program, and we have some kind of crossover between our communities, so that each community isn't having to replicate all of the same offerings that they would do if we're at that point where that's even an option for us. So I think perhaps that's part of a broader discussion we could certainly have as a group kind of going forward. Any other hands on what we've discussed so far? Seeing none. Restaurant?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Councilor DeMarco from Wakefield.
Dennis Sheehan is trying to speak. I don't think many people know about the feature for raise the hand. A lot of people are raising their hand physically, but they're not pressing the button.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, there. If you look at the bottom, you should see a raise hand option, and if you raise your hand that way, it comes up on my screen, so I know to call on you. But with that, I'll turn to Town Administrator Sheehan.
Yeah, I think in terms of summer camps and summer programs, the two dates that everyone's obsessed over is the May 18th date, and when the governor sort of gives guidance there. And then for a parent of two kids who are in daycare, the daycare date is really that later date in June that, you know, all the parents are kind of watching that date. And so what we hear in May about what will happen in June is really how we're kind of managing sort of summer camps. And so much of ours is contracted out that, you know, the vendors are constantly interested in how to prepare, so.
Certainly. Do we have any other hands, either electronically or just waving? Yes, Select Board Member Bocci.
Hi, Ed, thanks. I'm curious if any of the other towns have done any surveys on level of participation from parents for their children, because I know there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress out there, and we want to get the kids out of the house, but how do we do it safely? And if we open up a program, would it be overwhelming? Would it be underwhelming? Has anyone from any of the towns done any surveys? I don't think we have. If Bob can hear me, if we've done that through the rec department, but I'm just curious if there's any gauge of you know, what people want to do.
Have there been any surveys, or is there even some anecdotal guidance that people are having? I know there are a lot of, you know, different polls that are coming out in terms of comfort level of people generally in terms of going to restaurants and when they'd be ready to fly again and things of that nature. Obviously not at the most local of levels. Does anyone have a sense of where your community is at with that through, you know, communications or discussions you may have had with anyone? I do think that it is an important question, and I'm not sure it's one that we necessarily have an answer to as of yet in a lot of our communities. But I think it's something that it's going to be a consideration. I expect we're all going to be factoring in for any decisions we're making going forward.
Ed, I believe Ramey Parker's raising her hand.
Yeah,
Yes,
I don't know how to. I don't know how to raise my hand.
No worries. I'll just keep scrolling. So Vice Chair Parker from Stoneham, yes.
So I guess for me, it's a little bit different because I've been involved with youth sports for a long time, and the schools, you know, PTO. I think a lot of parents that I talk to personally, especially those of young children, are a little bit leery of sending their kids out right now. They are dying to get them together with their friends and, you know, get them back out to playing and doing sports. And with the nice weather coming, it's challenging. But for me personally, from the people that I've talked to, I don't feel that their fears are lifted yet. And I think we just still have to wait and see what the governor says as far as mandating anything. You know, the conversations we have with our rec department are what can we offer besides physical? You know, I've had this conversation with our rec director, like what else can we do to get creative, whether it's, you know, online stuff or, you know, virtual stuff. So we're trying to think outside the box, but for me personally, I don't think the parent comfort level is there yet. So that's just my experience.
Thank you for that. It's a really important perspective. And with that, I see that we also have a Select Board Chair, Mark Dosser, who had his hand raised as well.
Sorry, then I dropped it. I just was going to add the one thing that our Board of Health has been talking about is thinking about doing whatever planning is possible, figuring out the kinds of things that are likely to flood in. So as you talk about whether it's a sporting activity or a restaurant opening or whatever they are, there'll be a flood of activity that's going to take place. And I think we're all in the same situation where when that happens, the boards will be overwhelmed. So one of the things is trying to see if there are any things that you can kind of line up in advance, you know, checklists, if you will, making sure that paperwork is ready, so that once there is an opportunity, when the governor gives kind of a go ahead, that there'd be a chance to kind of start it in the most orderly fashion possible.
Indeed, yes. And that's something you're working on in Reading currently?
Yes, so both Board of Health and actually the command team as well.
Thank you. I see Councillor Chines from Wakefield has his hand up as well.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you everyone for being on. I just thinking about the question of what happens with some of the summer programs. I think one of the big variables that we face is what happens on the employer side. One of the things that I think we're struggling with in the company that I work for, and I've heard from other folks, is when do employers start to bring people back to work? And part of that's predicated on what the governor does, but part of that's also predicated on what are their policies across the country, what is the level of comfort, what are the accommodations that they have. And I think as we think about planning for the summer in our communities, a lot of what we do is going to be dependent on that. Do people need childcare? And if that's the case, I think we might see more of an impact on some of our summer programs than if not. Unfortunately, I just don't think we have a lot of good answers to that yet, certainly in Wakefield, and I would guess in almost all of our communities. But I think that's something that we've got to be thinking about and planning for, so that to the extent that we can help, our families and our parents who might be heading back to work in June, July, that we're ready to do so.
Thank you for that. And certainly some of that work may very well involve restaurants, and that's obviously a big issue, I know, for many of our communities. Many restaurants now are offering the takeout option. Some restaurants are in fact closed, but it seems all signaling is that when restaurants are allowed to reopen for seated diners, it's going to be at more limited capacity. And so a restaurant that may have 100 people, 100 person capacity, might be at 50 people. So I think some of what goes into the considerations is there a way that we can help these businesses still, but preserving social distancing? And I know that there's been some discussion already about things like, can you expand, for example, outdoor seating somewhere? So perhaps into a parking lot, or if there's a neighboring lot, or lawn next door where a restaurant could still potentially achieve its 100 person capacity for its own viability, but also preserve the social distancing, which obviously is so important as well. Have any of your communities been through those sorts of discussions yet? Have you heard much from the business community relative to that?
Hello.
Yes.
How you doing? Anthony Cogliano, Board of Selectmen Chairman from Saugus. I just had this conversation tonight with the Wong family from Kowloon. They, as you know, if we do get to the point where we're going to start opening up again, obviously their capacity is going to be cut substantially. So I just talked with them and their attorney tonight about extending their seating out into the parking lot. They do have an outside area, but they won't even go further, cut their capacity in half, but have double the seats outside, so they're spaced out. So that's something we just talked about tonight, but it certainly sounds like a good idea moving forward. And I'm sure we're going to see other places want to do the same.
And are we seeing like that's incredibly timely? Are we seeing that with other communities too? Like Linfield comes to mind with Market Street specifically. I know that there's a lot of opportunity there, potentially, but I think all of us in our communities could probably think of a few restaurants at least that have the potential to do that. Be it maybe set up a tent, be it just outdoor seating in a parking lot, things of that nature. Have other communities run into this yet, or has there been much thought given to it?
Ed, it's Rob Dolan from Linfield. Yeah, tomorrow we are meeting with the Market Street management to talk about restaurants, to talk about setup. And one of the restaurant owners is on the governor's committee for reopening, the owner of Davio's. And there seems to be a pretty consistent information come out of the restaurant community that it's going to be a priority to open more outside seating, which also brings into the liquor laws in terms of those issues. But so I'm hoping that the governor provides, the committee provides some very clear guidelines and some special legislation if necessary to open up what for Linfield is the backbone of our very small commercial base.
Right, certainly. And that is the issue. I mean, the ABCC, when we're looking at it, they're talking about a footprint, basically, and it's normally just the brick and mortar location. So the idea of, perhaps even regionally, if we find that this is an issue for a number of our communities, reaching out to our respective delegations that, as a region, for these sorts of exemptions, given the circumstances, I think would be something that would be really important for us to all, continue a dialogue on. Anyone else running into similar issues or having other creative ideas? I know a lot of restaurants, if they're at 25% capacity, for example, they can't make the numbers work. And so they have to figure out how to safely get to their capacity numbers. All right, well, seeing nothing further on that, I'll move along to the next piece. And that's actually item number 3. And that's—
Ed, you had a couple of hands up. I think Jen from Melrose and Paul.
Oh, my apologies. All right, so we'll begin first with City Councilor from Melrose.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jen Grigoritis. I'm the Ward 6 City Councilor and the current Council President. And obviously, we have a slightly different structure in our government than you all do. But around the opening of businesses, Mayor Broder formed an economic development task force that consists of representatives of the council, his administration, the local chamber of commerce, and several business owners. And we've met twice. And one of the things that's currently before us is this idea of reopening. How do we use outdoor space? How do we look at our current regulations to allow public space to be used for retail? I know Assembly Row in Somerville is looking into doing outdoor markets where they're going to let both retail and restaurants sell outdoors. And the other request that we've had from community members that we're considering is dedicated curbside pickup parking in our downtown. To your earlier point, assuming that restaurants are going to be operating at reduced capacity and there might be hesitation on the part of the public to go in, how do we make that easier for people in the long term? So, and I believe we have a survey going out, I think, tomorrow to the business community.
Got it.
Thank you.
So it'll be interesting to see what those results turn out. Any other communities on that? Do we have any other hands raised? I see Councilor Donaco from Wakefield.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to withdraw my hand.
Okay, thank you. So we'll keep moving on then to the next item, and that is the handling of town meetings, elections, and large public gatherings. I know that each of us has a somewhat different structure. Some of us are representative town meeting, others are not. And we also have the city council structure, obviously, which is different. So how are communities, and as I understand it, legislation allows for representative town meeting to participate remotely. Do I have that correct for those communities? I see head nods, yes. So for those communities that have town meeting that are open to all, has there been discussion about what that may look like, or what steps you'd be looking to take in the coming months or weeks, I suppose? And Mr. Crawford.
Yeah, that's obviously a big challenge right now with what's going on and the fact that you can't have large groups get together. We, our moderator actually proposed doing a town meeting in the parking lot in your car. I'm not sure how that would happen or what that would look like, but that was the only way to, under the current structure, to make that happen. We also have a quorum requirement, which is a challenge. There's current legislation in front of in the House right now that would allow the select boards to reduce the quorum requirement. So we may have a meeting, or we have the ability to have a meeting within one of our buildings and have some social distancing going on at the same time. You can spread out a certain number of seats and run a town meeting with a much lower quorum and still get your budget approved and your work that you need to get done before July 1st. Of course, we still have the ability to go past July 1st, but if we could get it done before then, it would certainly make life a lot easier. So again, that's going to be based on what happens in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I believe that's going to change.
And when is your town meeting set to open?
We just extended it out to June 20th.
Okay. So you're already pretty close to that July 1 date.
Correct.
With your current scheduling.
Right.
Right. And other communities dealing with this issue? Do I see any more hands?
Ann Landry has her hand.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes, I see Ann Landry. Yes, good evening.
Good evening. I apologize for not locating the virtual raise hand
No
option.
worries.
We'll be revisiting this question on May 27th as the Reading Select Board. We'd previously postponed our town meeting to mid-June. We do expect the legislature to pass a bill allowing for remote participation in town meeting. We have representative town meeting. It's, I think, part of that same piece of legislation that's in the House that would allow for a reduction in quorum requirements. And I expect that will happen soon. And then we will be discussing how to handle town meeting remotely or to further delay on May 27th. Although I think we had talked seriously about how really it will be ideal to at least get the budget done in June before the end of the fiscal year. And we have a task force that our chair, Mark Doxer, is working on to examine how to handle town.
Thank you. And I would imagine the consensus of everyone here tonight is each community is looking to have a budget by June 30th. Is that the general sentiment of everyone? Are there any communities that are looking to push that out beyond June 30, or is it? I see a lot of head shaking no. Yes, Town Administrator Sheehan.
So Stoneham does have open town meeting with no quorum requirement, so it is a challenge in that regard. We are planning for both pass at this point and have presented a series of dates. So, you know, each day is so different that it's been hard to exactly predict how to roll anything out. So we are operating on both paths in terms of an interim budget as well as an annual budget so that everyone knows about the possibility of it happening.
And I see Mr. Mayo from Wakefield as well.
Oh, I actually didn't have my hand up.
Oh, that was an old one.
But I think we're under the same boat, and talked a lot with the moderator too, because technically, you know, he now has the ability to move town meeting since it's been set and the warrant has been approved. I do not want to go with a 1/12 budget. I don't think there's any town manager or administrator or mayor that wants to do that through my discussions with them. So we do have a precedent of having an outdoor town council meeting, so we may have an outdoor town meeting as well. So we'll kind of waiting to look through that.
And we'll just hope for some good weather if that's the case. Indeed. All right, so with that, then I'll move on to the next item, which is managing various boards, committees, commissions, their meetings, and also preserving, but encouraging at the same time public participation. Obviously, things are very different for all of us, and I'm interested in the perspectives of the other communities. You know, how are you getting the business of your town or city done? Are your boards and committees and commissions meeting? Are you having public hearings? How has that been going? What have you been finding have been some of the challenges or perhaps some of the advantages in that? And how are you incorporating in public participation and public comment to the work you're doing these days?
Anthony Cogliano.
Yeah. Good evening.
We started the Zoom meetings. We've had 2 Board of Selectmen's meetings on Zoom. I know the school committee's meeting on it, and we haven't had any problems. I was very worried when we first started how it was all going to work, but we've had no problems. We've had good public interaction. Anyone that's wanted to speak on the issue, if they couldn't get through on Zoom, I had them call my cell phone. So we've really had no issues whatsoever with moving forward all the time. So I would love to get back to a situation where we can meet in public again, but this is the best we got, so we deal with it.
Certainly, indeed. I see that we also have Select Board Chair Doxer as well, who has his hand up from Reading.
Oh, I didn't, but I'm happy to.
Yep.
So we've been using Zoom. I think it's working pretty well. We've been meeting weekly. This will be the first week we won't have met in, I think, 4. We've had public comment coming in through email, actually. So public comment toward the beginning of the meeting, and then issue specific during the meeting. But I'm very interested in hearing how other people are handling that as well. It's been difficult, I think, where usually in a meeting people are able to speak with their own voice, obviously, and stand up and be recognized, versus somehow having somebody else read the message is a little bit different. I'm very interested in how other people are working with that.
Well, I can speak on the Wakefield side just briefly that we have, I guess we were early adopters in terms of the Zoom technology back in March. And we had been having some discussion at the town council level, probably town councils a month or two prior, about the idea of potentially allowing for remote participation. So that had been a discussion that had been started already. The pandemic obviously forced it before us to make some decisions at that point. And it seems to be from Wakefield's perspective, I think it's been going incredibly well. We have been able to do the business of the town. The town council has been able to meet and hold its meetings as we normally would. I'm not aware of any committees, commissions, or boards that have not been, including things like the ZBA, in their adjudicatory capacity, being able to have a public meeting. And that has worked quite well. I believe in Mr. Mayo University are using Zoom across the board for all of our meetings. We print all of the login information on the agendas for these meetings. So any member of the public is allowed to, as they are even this evening, allowed to sit through and listen in real time to what is being discussed. Certainly when there are public meetings that members of the public are allowed to speak, certain points, we open that up for discussion. We also allow emails to be submitted through a portal, and we even allow a Dropbox outside of our town hall, so that if anyone is looking to offer a public comment and perhaps they don't have access to the internet, they can submit that, and then those are retrieved and then read at the beginning of our meetings. So I think overall we've had surprisingly good success in being able to streamline a lot of our processes, despite the fact that we have a very different forum to do it. I see that we have Vice Chair Parker from Reading as well with her hand up.
Stoneham, but that's
okay. I'm sorry, my apologies. Stoneham, yes.
So we've had a couple of select board meetings via, we're using the GoToMeeting platform. And one of the first meetings we did, we had a public hearing, and we had a call-in number, and we designated, a 5-minute window for people to call in. Nobody called in. And then at another meeting, there were people who logged into the meeting but didn't participate. We're trying to figure out right now, I believe our secretary is setting up a public comment email address for people to send in if they have any questions that we could answer, beforehand, or during our meeting, answer their questions via the internet here, whatever we're calling this. So, we usually have a segment on our agendas for public comment, which we haven't been including right now. But I think this is probably a way that we're going to be able to hear from the public a little bit more, whether it's email or call in. And if you give, for hearings per se, you might want to give like a 5-minute window for a call in.
So it sounds like that continues to develop in Stoneham then, the optionality there. Great. And I see we also have Melrose City Council President Gregoritis as well with her hand up.
Thank you. So the city of Melrose is also using WebEx, which we were able to leverage through our existing contract with Cisco. So it was no additional cost, and thankfully has been relatively free of the Zoom bombers that has been a challenge that many of us have read about and hopefully not experienced. I think it took us a little bit to get up and running, but we have pretty much all of our boards and commissions, along with the school committee and the council, meeting via WebEx on our regular schedule. Similarly to Stoneham, we're allowing people to submit public comment to us in advance via email to let us know that they wish to speak live, and our city clerk is able to pull them up as attendees into the meeting. And then we also pause a little bit to see who wants to participate. I think one challenge for us has been we haven't been able to live stream the WebEx through our cable access station. So we are concerned that we're missing some of our older constituents who aren't as comfortable with WebEx or may not have the technology at home to access, but we are able to get the meetings rebroadcast. So I think it's working, and I think in some ways it's allowed people to who maybe couldn't come down to City Hall at 7 o'clock at night to participate from the comfort of their home.
Thank you for that. And you're finding, it sounds like by and large, you're having good success with what you have in place currently.
Yeah, I think it's really worked, and I think it's a real testament to our IT department and our city clerk's office. They've really been very hands-on in managing the meetings for us, which we really appreciate.
I think certainly all of our communities that have community access television and committed IT departments, and I know that I probably speak for all of us when we thank them for that, because this can't happen without them. You know, it's so incredibly important. Even what we're doing this evening, our community access station WCAT, without them, we couldn't do this. You know, they are just incredible partners in all of this. I see that we have Town Administrator Mr. Mayo with his hand up as well.
I would be interested to know how some of the other communities have felt that their public hearings have gone. A little bit different than a public meeting, but a public hearing where it's not just public participation, but it's actually people that are discussing on a project, land use project, or what have you. You know, we are running through Zoom. It's done extremely well. Thank you to our clerk and our IT department for setting this up. We can hold multiple Zoom meetings with multiple committees. I have actually attended via Zoom a number of these public hearings, and the zoning board had one, and it's been great with the screen share model, and there were members of the public that questioned the plan, and I thought it went very well. Our planning board actually had public hearings on a number of zoning articles that are going to our town meeting, part of the process, and that has worked very well, as has our Conservation Commission. Town Council held a public hearing on a underground storage tank license that needed to have. So I've been very pleased with it, and I do want to echo WCAT, our local cable, has done a fabulous job. And in a strange way, I think these meetings are actually more accessible to the public, because if I'm not mistaken, every one of them is videoed, and every one of them for every committee is then broadcast on our website, maybe delayed in some instances, but certainly the school committee and the town council are being on direct. So I think that's worked really well. But I'd love to hear from some of the other communities on how their public hearings went, because not everyone is doing them. And I'd be interested to see if anybody had any issues that, you know, I'll say this, then we'll have a problem with a public hearing next week. So maybe this will help us get ahead of the curve.
Are there other communities? Yes, Saugus. Yes.
We've had several public hearings, and most of them have gone smooth. We allow the public comment. Similar situation, they just raise their hand and take their questions. We do have a couple hot button issues coming up on the 19th of May, so it'll be interesting to see how many people line up to oppose some of the. We have one new entertainment complex coming into town, and an issue with a car dealer that the neighbors don't want. So I'm sure it'll be very exciting fielding all those calls. But so far, so good. We've allowed public comment on everything. We have a public comment halfway through the meeting and another one right at the end. So we've had a lot of back and forth with the community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we next have a comment from Linfield as well. No. Blue Loucher.
That's Reading, that's me.
My apologies.
In Reading, our conservation commission has had a couple of continued public hearings, and they've gone fine. They've had no problem. They've not yet started any new hearings. Partly, and our other main land use boards, planning and ZBA, have really shown no appetite to want to have public hearings. None of the boards are dealing with issues right now where the applicants are in any sense of an urgent hurry. So we've been fortunate in not having any zoning articles or things like that with a timeline. And in Reading, the select board is going to discuss having a public hearing policy, a formal policy, although perhaps an emergency one and temporary one, because we are concerned, especially with some of the land use boards, about what happens when someone looks back and has somehow, claimed they've been denied access to a proceeding. So we've engaged our town council, and the board will be seeing a draft policy so that all the land use boards especially are protected.
Thank you for that. And I guess wrapping up this topic, then I'll move on to our next, which is number 5, which has really been, I think, mostly covered by some of our discussion already. I'll just say that I know that Melrose identified the Economic Development Task Force that has recently been convened. Are there other communities that are doing similar things to think about how to best support our local businesses as we look to, have this rolling reentry into the economy? I see no hands as of yet, so it sounds, oh, actually I see 2 hands, I'm sorry. I'll turn it first to Councilor Smith-Galvin of Wakefield.
Thank you, Ed. And I was just going to follow up on that. I'd be curious to hear what the other towns have in terms of existing economic development directors or paid staff doing that, and how you see their role going forward.
Now, do we have communities that do have existing economic development directors or someone in a comparable role or having comparable responsibilities? And what has their role been? How do you see it changing? I see some hands up that predate that question, but I'll turn it over to Reading. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, our economic development director's job has changed quite a bit in the last 2 months. I think she's far more busy now. She's working pretty closely with the Chamber of Commerce that we share with North Reading. So for instance, they have discussed and worked on restaurant opening and having more outdoor dining. What are the liquor license implications, as Steve mentioned earlier? So we're finding a very collaborative atmosphere among our restaurants. Many of them are very small mom and pop restaurants in terms of our downtown area. So the paid staff, as it were, is very, very engaged and active in this area. We are trying to retain as many small businesses as we can.
And are there particular challenges that you're finding from those small businesses? Obviously, there's a great deal of uncertainty, which we all know, but are you hearing anything in particular, what their biggest concerns are going forward?
They're very concerned about the safety of their customers and their staff. That's the wild card that none of us have really great answers for. Obviously, economically, they're challenged, but I think most of them are a little more concerned about the health issues over the economics.
Ed, if I could just piggyback on that for a second.
Of course.
So Mark Doxer from Reading as well. Just piggybacking on what Bob was saying, the Board of Health and command staff have started to put together a plan to help when it's time to open restaurants and things, kind of how to do it. So deciding where priorities will take place, getting some extra help. The fire is doing a lot of inspections and a few other things right now to help, so that the Board of Health is setting where they have to go first, typically to some of the closed locations. But just starting to do some planning so that when there is the opportunity to move ahead, we know what we want to do and we have a plan that we can start to implement directly.
Good. And I see that we also have Councilor at Large from Melrose, Jack Eccles. So Councilor Eccles.
I don't think I raised my hand.
All right, fair enough. All right. So moving on then, beyond this issue, there are obviously issues of how we deal with things like curfews and any sort of decisions that we may be making as municipalities as compared with what the state may be mandating for us, or perhaps offering us some guidance on. So maybe if we could just survey those participating here, are there certain criteria that you expect you'll be using in making those decisions about whether your community may be, say, more restrictive, for example, than what the state may allow in terms of reopening, perhaps hours or capacity issues and those sorts of things? And what would be the drivers? Would it be your Board of Health recommendations? Would it be task forces that you've set up? Your executive bodies? What would be the driving determinants there?
Ed?
Yes.
If you don't mind, we certainly have a large concentration of stores and restaurants at Market Street. And like the other towns, we have some small mom and pops around the town. But the Market Street, as our town administrator said earlier, we're going to meet with them tomorrow to see where they stand and what their thoughts are. But a lot of it's going to be gauged on what the ABCC will allow and what our Board of Health will allow. And of course, the guidance that we're going to get will probably be restrictive in nature in the first place. We have some curfews and certain restrictions on the Market Street entity that's different from the rest of the town already. And I think what we'll probably be looking at is some sort of adjustment to that, depending on what is allowed, because they've already asked on how big of an outdoor seating area can they be allowed to create. And then if you're familiar with the complex, you'd be shutting off streets. And is this going to be allowed by the ABCC? Is it going to be allowed by our Board of Health? All those things are still up in the air. And of course, it's all governed on when we open back up. But as you know, and people that are in business, you can't open up a restaurant and at 20% capacity, 30% capacity. It's not even worth opening. So it has to be something that's makes sense, even open inside, and then obviously we'd like to provide some outdoor seating if that's going to make it economically feasible for them to open. We're still very curious on how many restaurants and shops are going to reopen in general in the long run, and we're very curious. The mom and pop places in town we've always pushed to frequent those and do the takeout, and my family does. I know all the other families do around here. It's a small town. We all know the owners very well, and they've been doing a pretty brisk business. So we've been trying to go to our local stores and restaurants, but I'll be curious what happens with the bigger development up there. That'll be interesting, but we'll certainly support what they need to open and be viable. That's what it's important to our town. It's important to everybody that works there, and it's certainly. I'm curious on how the staffing model is going to look. I'm sure they're going to have trouble staffing at any kind of capacity, near full capacity. So it's a big challenge for everybody. Thanks.
I think too, as a region, the idea of curfews and last call and the like, at least in the short term, it will matter, because we don't want to create a situation whereby we have patrons just migrating from one town to the next because of very different times in place. So I think that's probably a discussion that we can continue to have as we have some more guidance from the governor on where we're headed in the months to come, certainly. Moving on to agenda number 6, if I don't see any other hands up, I don't believe I do. Item number 6 is sharing of best practices or lessons learned thus far. I know this has been a trial by fire for all of our communities, certainly. But are there any things that you've learned thus far as a municipality that you'd like to share, or any lessons that you may be taking with you now as you're making future decisions as we continue to navigate through the pandemic? Any communities?
Ed, it's
Yes.
Rob Dolan. You know,
Yes,
I've always
yes.
known this, but what I've been particularly been made clearer to me is the professionalism of the vast majority of staff that we have been able to, from home, in Linfield, which is basically management consists of myself in terms of the top level. Department heads have taken upon themselves to be creative, and line employees have come in to make sure the job gets done. So the idea that the world will change now as it pertains to flexibility of work, where people can do their jobs. Does everyone have to come to town hall all the time? They've proven to me that they are responsible professionals that when given the tools to have, to display ideas and to implement them, have done it without even, in some cases, notifying me within their own circles. Many of the departments have actually met, be it by phone or Zoom on their own, be it the Council on Aging, who took it upon themselves amongst 3 people to call 1,500 people every 10 days to see how they're doing. If someone needs to go shopping, I know in Melrose, my mother's been called several times, a senior citizen, whether she needs help. Even our library that hasn't been open, and I don't know when it will open again, has taken upon themselves on the internet to create a large pool of opportunity to continue to learn at every age. So the idea of structure in towns and in cities is often rigid and kind of basically sometimes oppresses creativity and freedom. And in some cases, people have been able to rise to this challenge even at a town hall where the rules or the union contracts sometimes, put a damper on that.
So seeing the positive, certainly, and I think we're seeing a lot of that in many of our communities. Councillor or Vice Chair Santos from Wakefield.
I would echo everything Rob said about having such joy in the professionalism of our workers as well. I think something that we seem to have been doing okay, but is definitely important, is to have consistent messaging from all the departments. So if Board of Health is saying something and our town council is a little bit off, or certain departments are, I really think that sends confusing messages when none of us know what's happening, and the news is so fluid. So I think for best practices, really understanding that you have to have one voice. And I think someone from Reading mentioned this, pushing that out wherever you can, pushing that out to whatever platform you're using is very important for our citizens to hear that one voice. And I think it gives some confidence in at the municipal level that we may not be feeling at another level, perhaps. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. I see Councillor at Large from Melrose, Jack Eccles, hand up.
So in response to Rob Dolan from Linfield, to just talk a little bit about what we're doing in Melrose, we've set up a volunteer network called Melrose Helps. So there's a city employee who has probably a little bandwidth right now because she's in charge of our bookings for Memorial Hall, which is obviously closed. And so she's been coordinating distribution for anything. And then we have a field, many volunteers, I don't know the exact number. And then all the counselors were made team captains. And so we coordinate on a weekly basis to check in with the volunteers to make sure that the calls are happening. And we basically call people until they opt out. If they don't opt out, they get a weekly check-in. And then, so we take down notes of anything that they might need. And then that's submitted to sort of a centralized distribution of help that they might need, that they can then get.
What sort of response are you finding from residents?
As anyone who's ever picked up a phone and called strangers before, a lot of opt-outs. But then there's, I think we all end up with a few volunteers that have some opt-ins, and then they do weekly check-ins, whether it's just getting information about city services, or, I've had one of my volunteers tell me that one of her the people she calls just likes to talk, which I think is a helpful thing too. But then there's some grocery orders as well.
So that's a real benefit to a lot of folks who otherwise would be without there. Thank you for that. Do we have anyone else with a hand raised? I'm seeing none. So with then,
Ed?
yeah, yes.
It's Carlo from Reading. I'm just
Yes.
curious on if anyone wants to comment on any of the towns and cities about using reverse 911 or code red for getting information out. Has everyone done that? Have you not done it? Just curious.
Are there any communities that are not using code red or something similar for a reverse 911 call? Are all 6 of us doing that? Wakefield is, I can say. It appears everyone else is some version of that, certainly. And how have people been finding that as a communications tool so far? Carlo, have you had much of a reaction from residents?
Sorry, we've done several, and I don't get any complaints. I happen to be the secretary of the board. We don't overwhelm anyone, and I think don't call for no reason. It has to be something important or a brand new ordinance that we like the mask ordinance that Ann spoke about earlier. That was a call, and there was another call. I honestly forget what it was. But with the guidance coming from the governor, that made me another call just to inform all the residents. Not everyone's on Facebook. Not everyone gets the paper. In social media and other forms. Not everyone goes to the town website. We have a nice red banner on our town website for COVID-19 at the very top with a lot of resources. And I'm new to the board, but I've been here for about 11 years in the town of Reading. And I want to commend our command staff, who's been outstanding. We have our fire chief calling all the senior housing complexes several times a week to see what they need, offer PPE. We have a lot of volunteers calling upon people and just supporting our local restaurants and businesses that are open. And I can only say positive things about that. I mean, it's having the command staff enacted early on by Bob and chief of police and the fire chief was, I think, a great move, and it served us well. And hopefully we can get rid of it soon, but I think it's going to be needed for a while. And until we get to some sense of normalcy, and this may be the new normal for a while virtually, but I know as Mark said, our town meeting agenda at the end of the month will be a big one, and how we resolve that and try to keep that date in mid-June or extend it another week to try to get it done for the fiscal year.
I think it will be interesting to see what new ways of communicating or connecting remain in place even after the pandemic has passed, because I think we're being quite creative in how we're reaching out to people. So that'll be interesting. I see Vice Chair Parker from Stoneham has her hand up as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Rob's last comment about how creative our employees have been with bending and flexing with their schedules, but also coming up with really new great ideas that could be coming down the road, maybe Dennis, if he'll let us. But we've set up an emergency command center, we'll call it, where it's at the senior center, and some of our department heads, our rec department, our community planner, the senior center director, our who else is in there? Our community addiction coordinator. They've all been tasked to that department, to that senior house, and they're food shopping for seniors, making phone calls for mental checks to make sure everybody's okay. And it's a small group, but they've done a tremendous amount of work. And it just goes to show how different departments really can come together and work together collaboratively. And they're still doing their regular jobs, but they're, I don't know, I think it gives everybody a pause to see what all the other departments do and figure out ways to work better together, if you will. So there's, great stuff happening, especially with regard to our senior population. We're proud of the job I'm proud of the job that everybody's doing here in Stoneham. So
that's great. That's great to hear, certainly. I think that the amount of outreach is so important too. It sounds like so many communities are doing a lot of that, especially with our senior population, which has gone from being able to have socialization at the senior center or with neighbors to potentially feeling quite isolated. So I think we're all very cognizant of that, which is important. I see that we have another comment from Councilor at Large, Migliorelli. From
another race.
Yes.
Just wanted to follow up on the phone calling. So most of the emergency communications come from our mayor's office, and we use Everbridge, which is the platform that allows us to call and update residents to help supplement our mayor's videos. He does an online daily video on Facebook, and it's posted on our website. And we've noticed that over time that our open and listen rates have significantly improved. And it's been a good tool, another follow-up tool, especially to reach people who are not on social media, which I feel like is the biggest challenge I think we're finding, is that you can't bump into people on the streets anymore and have these conversations or at events. And so your communication channels have gotten significantly narrowed. So that's another tool that we use in Melrose.
Thank you for that. I do see that we have a Facebook Live question that's come through. I'll just answer it because it's a pretty easy one. It would be apparently someone from Wakefield who is asking, with the mask delivery starting tomorrow, will they be leaving them in mailboxes or will they be ringing our doorbells? Masks will not be left in mailboxes. They will be left in doorways, and their bells will be rung, or there will be a knock at your door. So anyone from Wakefield, that's how they'll be delivered. The next item on the agenda was just to at least introduce or begin the discussion of benefits of regionalization. One of the goals that I see with this is it provides us with an opportunity, in any number of ways, but one of them could be buying power and looking at face masks, for example, and perhaps not the best example. But if that was something where we had several communities who were perhaps interested in securing a good number of face masks, we could perhaps look to do that and get them at a better price point. I know after this meeting was convened, there had been a news story, I think over the weekend, that talked about I think it was the seven different northeastern states who were able to band together for PPE and to be able to purchase that, have better buying power, basically. And so while I don't know to what extent we can do that during this pandemic, it certainly looks to present an opportunity for all of us going forward. I know that we're all expecting leaner budgets, less state aid, lower local receipts, and so we're going to be needing to look at ways that we can collaboratively work together and figure out how we can get the most bang for our taxpayer dollars with that. So I guess it's more kind of an open question where people stand with the idea of moving forward with this idea of looking to explore regional approaches when we have those sorts of issues, and also things like advocacy. I know that several of you have mentioned the issue of restaurant capacity and how we can safely expand that capacity to keep those businesses afloat. We all have our respective delegations at the State House, but if we together as 6 communities, have a particular position that we think advances all of our interests collectively, I think that gives us a louder voice and also helps our representation there, be able to advocate even stronger for us, knowing that we've all kind of come together. So any thoughts or comments relative to that? Certainly I would welcome, but I do see a lot of opportunity here for us as 6 neighboring communities to be able to do a lot of good, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Councillor Shines from Wakefield, I see, is next with a hand up.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to acknowledge, I actually think there's been a lot of great effort on the part of the town administrators across the communities, certainly Town Administrator Mayo in Wakefield, and his counterparts, the mayor's office in Melrose. I actually think there are a lot of areas where our communities have had some really good examples of successful collaborations. And as I think about the communities that are on this call, I think in Wakefield, we've partnered with each one in a variety of ways. And so, certainly would agree that that's something that we should continue to explore, but I think we're starting from a place where we've got a really strong foundation as a region in terms of working together collaboratively. And again, really credit Administrator Mayo and the other town administrators and mayors for making that happen.
Indeed, I spoke with the town administrator Mayo earlier today, and I was telling him how several years ago when I was on the finance committee, I was so impressed with his ability to look at how we can do things differently. Town assessor, for example, we share that role with Reading. We had shared building inspector with Linfield. Those are the sorts of things. So that there's no question that we have a very solid foundation by folks like Mr. Mayo and the other town administrators. Mayor Broder now, I know Mr. Mayo and Mayor Broder have a very good working relationship, as he does with everyone. Mr. Dolan, Mr. Sheehan, everyone. And so we're very appreciative of that. So there's no question that I think that the fundamentals are there. And we I think to your point, Councillor Chines, there has been success already shown. So this is a workable model for us. I think it's probably just one more of how we can expand it even further, especially so that our respective governing bodies can be in better collaboration, because it's certainly happening at the leadership level for each. Any other comments or thoughts on that aspect of things? Seeing none, then I'll move on next to item number 8, and that's access to testing. I included that because I think it's pretty clear that going forward in the weeks and months ahead, the access to testing and the emphasis on testing will only continue to increase, and be that COVID-19 testing, be it antibody testing, which I know right now there's some debate about its effectiveness and efficacy. I think we'll have a better sense of that within the next 10 days, it sounds like. But there no doubt will be any number of tests that will be more streamlined, and I think it provides a unique opportunity for all of us to think about how we may want to approach those issues. Perhaps Wakefield alone can't do something, but if we partner with a couple of the communities that are interested in also doing it, we could really ramp up and expand those opportunities for all of our residents. So again, we're not taking votes or having deliberations, for this evening's purposes, but have any of the other communities that are participating had similar discussions or kind of thought ahead, spoken with your boards of health about that issue, or how to make that happen? It looks like I have Mr. Crabtree, actually, from Saugus. Good evening. I think you may be muted, Mr. Crabtree.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
I just wanted to say
fantastic backdrop.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. Really great that you put this together. It's very informative. And I will say again, if you didn't hear me, you have a great man with Mr. Mayo, and he's a great administrator. But I did want to say with the testing, we were fortunate enough to partner up with a facility up on Route 1 to at least have our employees, first responders, Board of Health, to be able to get testing, and they're able to do the testing and get the results within 15 minutes. So that's something that's really been extremely, I think, helpful for us, especially with trying to transition with the Department of Public Health and the different guidelines as far as quarantine. And I isolation and whatnot. It's been helpful moving forward. Hopefully there'll be some guidance from the state or try to regionalize maybe some testing. You know, and I may be not as optimistic as everyone else, but I think we're going to struggle with businesses opening and some of these youth events where parents are going to need to have more confidence to send their children, even moving into the fall with schools. I mean, you see colleges that are looking at different models, and I think that's probably one of the important things is to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I think the testing thing is something I'd definitely be interested in speaking with some of the managers, administrators, and mayor about trying to organize something that might be more regional and accessible, so that we can actually use that data to make decisions. As we know, this is not easy. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, and each community has their own sort of flavor and sort of influence over what they think is right or wrong, and can take its own, viral with social media. So I commend everybody for doing what they can do. Each community is different, and this is definitely a challenge for all of us. But thank you for this forum.
Thank you for taking part. Next, I see Reading Select Board member Karen Herrick with her hand up. We may need to have.
I'm muted, sorry.
Yes,
testing. This is really important. I'm so glad you brought this up. We were fortunate last week at our last select board meeting to have 2 of our state reps and Senator Lewis join us on our Zoom call. And this was a topic we definitely raised to them. And I think that is a terrific idea of a way that some of us or all of us might be able to collaborate in the short term, or might be longer term, but this is going to be an issue for us, and I agree with the previous speaker that let's be ready for the worst case scenario and hope for the best. And I don't know if the legislatures have already made the rounds to your town councils or your other select board meetings, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to share our concerns with them, and hopefully they'll take it back. And of course, hearing from more of us will also, make sure that need is heard up at the State House.
Certainly. Yes, thank you for that. And we in Wakefield did have our delegation, and it was helpful to be able to discuss with them a number of issues for them to bring back to the State House for us. I do see that there is also an employee who is dialed in from the public, and she was just offering the comment that it's important for all the municipalities to make sure that testing is available for municipal employees as well as residents within communities. So I think that's an important reminder for all of us that when we're talking about residents, we also have, when you think about school departments or any number of department employees, there's a lot of folks that are part of the community that we want to make sure we keep safe. With that, I see Councillor Chines from Wakefield has his hand up again. Councillor Chines?
Thank you. Just 2 brief comments. I think, first of all, I echo sort of the comments that folks have made around testing employees. I think particularly for some of the higher risk employees for each of our municipalities, if we're talking about emergency workers and so forth, as we get to a time where dealing with sort of a long-term peak of COVID becomes our new normal, I think having some routine of regular testing for employees that are likely to come into contact with the public in high-risk situations is something we all need to be thinking about. Just the other point that I wanted to make with this, though, is that I think this is also an area where collaboration is not just something that should involve our 6 communities, but the healthcare systems that serve our communities as well. And certainly Leahy Health, Melrose, Wakefield have done some great work. I think as we think about potentially a regional strategy for testing, they've got to be part of that conversation.
Indeed, absolutely. And we're fortunate to have so many great healthcare providers within the region that we've defined. Do we have any other comments or questions or thoughts on that? If not, I'll move on into the next. And again, this is the broader topic of opportunities for regional collaborations or communications going forward in terms of services, economic and health. And again, we have some good structure in place now. And I credit a lot of, again, our mayor representative, our town administrators, and our town managers they work very well together, and they've been able to do a lot of really innovative thinking for all of our communities that have been a great benefit going forward. But I think the idea of services, is something that we can always continue to focus on, and whether we're talking about a sharing of employees between two communities, or sharing a backhoe, as Mr. Mayo used as an example, when needed. The ability for us to be able to collaborate and have open communication, I think beyond this meeting, it would be really important for all of us, and when the need arises, being able to be there, just as we're seeing within our communities, people coming together to take care of each other. I think we as a region can also come together and take care of each other, when certain or unique needs may arise. So I put that out there more for all of us to consider, going forward. And if anyone has any particular thoughts or comments, or even maybe in need of a backhoe that Wakefield could loan out, we certainly are happy to do it. Any comments or thoughts on that? I mean, is the general, yes, Vice Chair Parker from Stoneham.
So first of all, I just want to thank you for putting this together, because it's just really interesting. And I think we're all on the same page when we say, we want to work together and come up with great ideas. I was just hoping that if anybody had any, somebody talked about a survey, any kind of documents that they've already been working on with their community, if they don't mind sharing them with the town administrator, so we can just kind of all take a look, and maybe, something we're doing might help, Melrose or vice versa, just so we can kind of, share ideas, and then maybe something else comes up out of that. And yeah, we'll take it back home.
Fair enough. Any other committee comments on that from any other municipalities? All right, seeing none, then the final item on the agenda is really could just be labeled, we're all in this together. And I think we're all facing some of the similar challenges in terms of, again, our local receipts being down, our state revenue being down, so undoubtedly state aid being down as a result. I believe some of the forecasting by Senator Lewis when he appeared before the Wakefield Town Council was something along the lines of 13 to 18% reduction in revenue anticipated, just forecasted out. A few caveats to that, obviously, where federal funding lands, we don't know yet. That would be an important consideration, and also to what extent the state's rainy day fund would be tapped into. But I think there's no question that all of us are finding that we'll need to figure out ways to make sure that we can meet our financial obligations with undoubtedly less revenue. Have any communities begun that discussion? What sorts of approaches have you taken thus far, or has anyone forecasted out to kind of see where you expect to be? Maybe not in fiscal 20, but fiscal 21 and beyond. I'll first turn to Mr. Mayo on that, because I know Mr. Mayo, you have worked on that extensively for Wakefield.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am at this point, based on conversations with Jason Lewis, and we actually had a forecasting meeting with our finance committee on this, because we do get a lot of our income in local receipts as well. I'm looking at very simply starting with a 10% cut in local aid, and a 10% basically a 10% reduction in local receipts. The other item that I'm worried about on the revenue side is new growth. We do have been very blessed here to have some very good new growth over the last few years, and some big projects that are started. Some have started, some are a little bit further along. We have the power line coming through that was substation work has been done, thankfully. I think that will go forward. So there may be some timing issues here, but we're looking at about a 10% cut. Would love to hear some from some of the other managers what they think, and I think we're kind of in the same ballpark from what I've heard already.
Are there any other managers that have similarly forecasted out and have an expectation from any of the other communities?
Ed, it's Rob Dolan.
Yes. Yes.
I lived through 9/11 cuts and 08, 09 in my previous job, and now this. in the earlier years, they were able to cut additional assistance, which was something put in by Governor Dukakis. There was a significant cities and towns that have been around as long as our communities have. So we were looking at 12, 13, 14% reductions. What I think will happen, my guess is that the new formula that, Senator Lewis and others have worked so hard on is going to be retracted back to the old formula. That's probably $1 billion right there. That hurts a lot of communities. I think you'll hear the screams from a lot of communities. For a community like Linfield, I don't know, for talking to Steve, Wakefield, it's not that much of a hit. However, UGA, what's called UGA, unregulated governmental aid, I do think that a 10% to 15% cut might be the case. In terms of the new, going back to the old formula in Chapter 70, there's not much they can really cut there. A lot of it is by court order, and even in the worst of times, in the Great Recession, which obviously, one could argue was not as bad as this or was, they really couldn't cut Chapter 70 outside the old formula. So the other areas which I think are concerned for school departments would be what they're going to do with the circuit breaker, transportation, etc. But we do know one thing: they will cut aid, but they will not cut or reduce regulation on us. That is obvious. I see the Reading laughing. I see you, Bob. And that's certainly going to be the case, I think, here. So in terms of cutting aid, I don't know if you can cut the whole number in terms of including Chapter 70, but I think you can certainly look at the local town side being reduced considerably.
Indeed. I see that we have a Reading Town Manager, Letcher, as our next hand up.
Thank you. As Ed mentioned, state revenues look to be down, 14 to 18%. They have a rainy day fund. They had federal revenues, but they also have a lot of fixed costs that they can't really touch. So in a discussion with the senator, I actually think our local aid, the smaller portion, could be cut by 25%. But I agree with Rob that Chapter 70 is going to be much better protected, which has less of an impact on most of the communities on this call compared to some of the cities, certainly. But I'm with Steve. A 10% total state aid cut is what we're using as a forecast, and I think that's a little bit pessimistic. We're using an 8% loss in local revenues. And that's because a lot of people that used to walk around the lake in Wakefield and spend money are now doing that in Reading. Thank you, Steve. Something that we're concerned about, but we're in a good position to defend, is people who don't pay their tax bills in a timely way. And that's a cash flow issue. Property taxes are pretty much certain, but what happens when 20% of your customers can't pay? I've had discussions with the MMA and with the state in terms of some kind of bridge financing. That could be that's not a revenue problem, that's a timing of revenue problem. And that's an area we just need to be careful of, especially for cities and towns that have low cash balances. So I think, on balance, we are in, as municipalities, we are in far better shape than most of our peers in the rest of the country and most states, and certainly the federal government. Ironically, Prop 2.5 has constrained us for many, many years, and now it's protecting us. We never spent as much as many governments did. So, you won't see 10% across the board revenue reductions in Massachusetts communities. There's no way. You might see, at worst, 5%. In Reading will probably be less than 5%, closer to 3% total. And that's because property taxes, again, are protected.
Thank you for that insight. And we have Town Manager Crabtree from Saugus with his hand up next.
So I would just echo the same concerns that my colleagues have talked about as far as cuts and state aid. And I think that I agree that I think some of our communities here that are on the call are probably in a little bit better position. I think Saugus may be a little different in the sense of what, some of the concerns we have is we have a large commercial base. Those buildings are vacant. you know, some of them have vacant, some used it all because of the shutdown with the restaurants and other essential businesses. So we are concerned about moving forward with abatements that will have an impact, you know, in the following year. We're also with the meals, we depend on about $1 million a year in meals occupancy tax. So that is certainly going to be disrupted. So we may, you know, we also looking at water usage. Water usage is going to be down for us. So we're looking at possible deficits in the enterprise account. And things of that. I think I got an echo. But anyways, that with you know, trying to look at how we're going to, you know, ride the storm here for the next year or two to keep things stabilized. Looking at use of free cash and probably money in our stabilization. We're in a, you know, pretty good position where we have almost $10 million in stabilization and $2 or $3 million in free cash that's been certified from this past fiscal year. But you know, we're going to have to make those cuts, and people are going to have to understand there may be, you know, looking at if this doesn't correct in the near future, at looking at reductions in service and other things. Again, it's stress for people that are responsible for this, and making sure that we can make payroll and have enough in our operating budget. I think just this fiscal year alone, there'll have to be some kind of accommodations for cities and towns to deal with those expected revenues. And as one of the administrators talked about, the timing of receiving things. We've extended our tax deadline, you know, so that helps residents to some extent, but it's also creates more timing issues, because if they decide to pay later than that, you know, we're into a different fiscal year. So same concerns. I think this is still early and probably challenging without having all the information, or when this is sort of pandemic is going to sort of come to a softer landing. So those are the same concerns all the communities are, but I think it's good to have those conversations within the communities.
Indeed. Yes. Thank you for that insight. And I see that we have Town Administrator Sheehan from Stoneham with his hand up as well.
Yeah, so when we did our initial projection between local aid and local receipts, we did put in about 13%. One of our concerns for us is we have a municipal ice arena, and when they talk about what happens in September and in the fall that this thing might come back, that's also a revenue concern for us in terms of you know, social distancing going to be happening on something like that, and that's additional concern on top of what everyone else has said.
Indeed, yes. Thank you for that. Seeing no new comments, then we'll just move on to the end, the closing remarks. So if anyone had anything else they wanted to offer up to everyone that's gathered here this evening, you know, this is your opportunity to do just that. I see first we have, we'll go with Wakefield Town Councilor Maureen Butt first. Councilor Butt, good evening.
Hi, everyone. I realized we didn't do introductions at the start, and I know many of you, but I don't know all of you. So hello and goodbye, and a special hello to the person I've known the longest here, Chris Barrett from Linfield. Him and I went to high school together, so it's nice to see you virtually. I just want to echo some of the stuff that was said, total in support of the town managers and the mayors. You guys have been leading us in the right direction, and can't give enough credit to all the boards of health. This is a public health crisis, and I think as much as we can defer to our public health experts, that's what we should be doing. They should be coming to our meetings and advising us, and they know better. We are not. I don't know. I think most of you are not public health experts. That's why we do this instead of the Board of Health. I do want to say I love looking at long-term and fiscal budget, and once we get back on track, but I want to remind everyone, like, as Mayor, as Rob Dolan was saying, like, there's creativity happening right now, and I just want to highlight that and share some of those things. So, you know, Malden, who's not on this call, has kind of closed off some roads so people can walk and made pedestrian streets. And I think that's amazing. And it's something like we should all be considering in this time. Our Wakefield food pantry that's seen 70% increase since the pandemic hit has found a way not to ask for people's IDs, which, you know, means more people get the food that they need. And I think if that's something that continue, if there's things in town that we don't have to make ID dependent or don't have to have people come in and fill out forms and can do it online, like we should really, those are kind of the things that now in crisis mode to help the most amount of people. And then, you know, a plug to my fellow counselor, Paul Donato, who's really who's really working with the restaurants in town and trying to figure out a way. So like Cambridge, the City Council in Cambridge is streaming movies that everyone can watch probably on their local access. And then they're encouraging people to do takeout and movies at home. Like, what a cool idea, right? Doesn't cost us a lot, but like, again, inspiring people to go out and eat. So I just, you know, we see these on social media, these ideas. If you guys have any of them, let us know. A lot of them are working with nonprofits like the biking group in Malden or the food pantry in Wakefield. But I think, you know, part of our job right now in crisis mode is to kind of highlight these new ways of helping the people who need help now.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butt. From Saugus, I see that Town Manager Crabtree did have his hand up. Is that still the case?
No, I was making a comment about I was interested, not that I want to start another conversation about our budget is in Saugus. It's interesting, and you guys may be in different situations, but the budget in Saugus has already been submitted. I submitted a budget by charter back on February 15th. So we're now going to, and we were partly through the Finance Committee hearings, we're now going to have to go through a process of changing and modifying that budget that was the preliminary estimated budget. But I think other towns are on different schedules with the budget and maybe just proposing or putting budgets together for submission. But that was my comment from the last topic.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I see that we have now Select Board Chair Doxer from Reading. Is that hand still up?
Nope, didn't cancel. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah,
Thanks
okay.
everyone for joining. Maureen, it was great kind of hearing those comments. I'm wondering if we can think about kind of where to take this going forward a little bit. It would be great to get some of these new ideas circulated through this group on a regular basis because they're going to happen regularly, probably more frequently than all of us are going to be able to get a couple hours to sit down together and chat. So I'm wondering if they maybe think about a way to kind of get ideas flowing that way. The other thing is, if people don't mind, could we share kind of our email addresses, kind of have a list of the folks who participated here and different board members and things, so that we can, you know, there may be things, you know, I noted a couple things I want to talk to people about, but that'd be a nice way to be able to follow up. And then maybe talk about when would be a good time to have another meeting. Because I think this is a great idea to get us talking together, to thinking about, you know, how we can work together, particularly where, you know, we share in some cases legislators and in other cases not. And that's great. We've been talking, I've been talking, Ann Landry's been talking, Bubba Lasher's been talking with the MMA also. And trying to have them help us with some of the issues that we're facing. They have some experience, but sometimes we need special things for our communities and kind of working through them as well. So anyway, thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you for Reading's strong participation tonight too. We do appreciate that. I see that we have a Wakefield Town Councilor Donato with his hand up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My discussion or my comments are going to be more on how we are going to best approach the businesses going forward as we try to navigate out of this COVID crisis right now. I've listened to a lot of the comments made by various communities on what their thoughts are. I think that if we're going to have a bigger issue right now in addressing the small businesses than most are really grasping onto at the moment. I look at long range right now. I know for a fact Reading, I know Melrose, I know Wakefield, I know Stoneham, all have big events that come up in September. How are you planning to enter into September at this point in time? If we don't know how the merchants are going to be able to be dealt with right now. We don't know whether or not we're going to be able to allow full capacity or not. We're not going to know whether or not there may be a resurgence in or an explosion back where the coronavirus is now coming back. How do we deal with the small businesses at this point? How's the other communities going to deal with that right now? Working in, I didn't hear any game plans coming out from any of this on how to move forward. Is there any thoughts on how you're going to proceed with these business activities that are set forth to come out in the future?
The town manager, LaLatcher from Reading has his hand raised, as does Mr. Mayo as well.
Thanks, Ed. Our economic development director, as I mentioned before, working with the chamber, is actually creating a toolkit for reentry for businesses of different types. You know, town managers never have any original thoughts. We just share them with each other. So I'm sure we'll do that.
Happy to pick up the best proven thoughts of everyone else. That's great. Mr. Mayo from Wakefield.
Business, excuse me, the whole business point is well taken, and I'll be happy to plagiarize the toolkit from Reading. Thank you very much on that and work together. I just wanted to thank our chair for putting this together, and I want to thank all the board members, but special thanks to my my manager and my manager friends, and I miss you guys. We have to figure out to have breakfast together soon. I think we could all get a egg McMuffin and sit around my lake. I'll let you guys sit around my lake, and we'll you know, socially distance somewhere. But thank you for being part of it, and I think we are much better when we work together. So thank you all.
Indeed, and I'll just close the thing though for the comments with again thanking everyone for taking part this evening. I'm working with Mr. Mayo, and we'll put together a debrief that we'll be sharing with everyone who is taking part this evening, and then that allows you to be able to share that with your boards or department heads. We'll also make this call available, this video conference available. We'll send that via email so everyone has that, and you can feel free to disseminate that amongst those within your communities. This is what I hope was the first of many really important meetings and collaborations that we can have as a region. I do hope that this notion of you know, taking a regional approach and coming together is one that will be started now and will continue on for many years to come. If there is an interest in convening again, certainly I think that would probably be an appropriate thing for us to do. So, you know, we can talk certainly offline on what that scheduling might look like and get some sort of rhythm, you know, going forward. And we will of course share everyone's contact information. So any direct follow-ups, you know, can be made that way. But again, I thank all of you for taking the time this evening. I think this is a really important beginning dialogue. And with that, I will say good evening to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, everybody.
Carlo, can I have a motion from you to adjourn?
Oh, sure. Oh, God. Motion to adjourn the Regional Summit meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
We got to go roll call. So I can see Ann.
Yes.
Karen.
Yes.
Carlo.
Yes.
Vanessa.
Yes.
And Mark, yes. We're adjourned, Reading. Thank you very much, all.